coming. We appreciate you being here. We'll have a very tailored presentation today. My name is Greg Cottrell. I'm a principal at North Huntington High School, which is actually in Clinton, New Jersey, right across the border into New Jersey from Pennsylvania.
And my name is Isabel Rosende, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent at the Nazareth Area School District. Some of my team members were just here. They presented as well at the conference, so we're really excited to be here today.
So since we have such a small audience, so we can sort of tailor our presentation to what you want to know, if you don't mind just sharing who you are and what you do.
I am Beth Genefield. I'm a librarian in Pine Ridge School District.
Perfect.
And
what school district was that?
Pine Richland. It's north of Pittsburgh here.
Okay.
In town, and I'm also a building technology coach.
Okay, great. I think it might be interesting what we have to talk about.
Yes.
Caroline teaches high school social studies for Cyber Charter School.
Okay, excellent.
Great.
So what we're going to talk about today is how we can use data about our students' online activity to inform our practice. And it's something that, you can go to the next slide.
Sure. Just really quick though, if we have some interactive activities, or if you want the actual PowerPoint, you can. I don't know how interactive we're going to be
We'll just
today.
have some discussion.
Yeah. But you can definitely scan the QR code to get a copy of our presentation, and then we are using Pear Deck to engage.
Oh, cool.
Awesome, great.
Stuck?
It is stuck.
Uh-oh.
There we go. I think it's.
So just a little bit of background about who we are and what we're doing is, as I mentioned, I'm a principal at a school that's a one-to-one Chromebook school, so every student has a Chromebook. I started as an assistant principal, and at my time as an assistant principal at this school, my job was to address inappropriate online activity. So we still have a program called Go Guardian that we use to monitor our activity. And I would get notified every time a student went somewhere inappropriate or searched something inappropriate. And so as I would look to address that behavior, I would see a record of all of this data, all of this activity that a student was doing online. But all we were doing with that was negative things. I was addressing the negative behaviors that occurred, but never actually looking at how can we use that to inform our practice. How can we pull out that positive learning behavior in order to really make educational changes? Because what I was seeing is, as an assistant principal at the time, as I was going into classrooms, it looked just like this. I would see kids on their Chromebooks, heads down, eyes down, doing exactly that. And how can I know what kind of learning environment was actually occurring in my school? So that's why I started to question, how can we look at this data to inform us about what students are doing, and then how can we then use that data to design better experiences for those kids? Because more and more time, we are spending more and more time with students in a situation like this. So we're now designing content for that. So I was doing a doctoral program at East Stroudsburg University at the time, so that's what I did. My dissertation focused on that idea, where I gave some data back to a handful of teachers about exactly what students were doing online for their class at home and in school. So I was able to tell them how much time the students were spending engaging in their content, what Google search terms each student used, who spent the most time, the least time, what the most popular websites were, things like that. And so I did that manually, and then Isabel came along after me, and I'll let Isabel explain what she did.
So for my study, I took the same concept and I said, okay, we designed these experiences for students to engage with online content, right? But how do we know that students are actually taking something away from that online experience? So it's different from designing a lesson plan and activity. It's truly an experience that students are having online. So piggybacking off of Greg's research, I wanted to know that whether or not teachers, classroom teachers, if they receive this online data on student learning experience and their research. As a library media specialist, as a social studies teacher, I'm doing so much research online. If we provided this information back to teachers on how students are engaging with that online content, would they use it formatively to redesign their instructional practice? And could they use it, actually, my secondary question was, could they use it to intervene at the individual student level. So you know a student is going down the wrong path when they're conducting research. They're on Wikipedia. So how could teachers use this information to really design a more powerful learning experience for students? But I was lucky enough to have the data organized in such a manner that teachers could easily interpret it, as opposed to how Greg was organizing the data manually.
Yeah, so we'll just real quickly, so we won't do the pear deck for this. But as a librarian or social studies teacher, the last time
Perfect audience.
it really
I just
is.
have to say.
Those are the people we found.
Those are the people we found to be most interested.
So
there
the last
should be
time,
more of you.
the last time that you assigned an activity for the students to complete online, did you look at any type of learning data? Did you have a clear expectation in mind for what experience you wanted that student to have online? Did you map that out at all?
Did we look at any
Yeah.
data like ahead of time to make a decision?
Well, how about after the fact?
Just whatever
Yeah.
research. I'm usually assigning, find a website, or is this a reliable website?
Mm-hmm.
Just did they complete what I was asking of them as far as tasks?
And that's a great example. So they completed an assignment, right?
Yes.
So you were assessing them on their
On the
ability to
assignment.
complete an assignment,
Yes.
but not so much the actual experience, the process that it took to get there.
Not necessarily, no.
Yeah.
So in social studies, I know I worked with a middle school social studies teacher in my dissertation, and she was very much interested in understanding the process that students engaged in while they were conducting the research on a particular research topic. Is that something that engages you, like something that you think about, or are you more about the product?
Everything is entirely online, so
Right.
that's their whole entire experience. So we use an online curriculum, but then we do supplemental. So when I do my planning, I try to make sure that it's accessible to all students. I do not specifically have the data for where they're going, but we do use GoGuardian.
Okay.
But if it's something that's an issue, like our tech department takes care of it, or the counselors, I am not privy to that information. So they'll say there was a warning that I'm not given what were they doing. So I try to find information that they, like some videos, some maps, to kind of have a variety of learning techniques and preferences. And if it's something like, well, I'm not really sure why did you do it this way, or why does it look exactly like this Google website or like Wikipedia, where that wasn't the source I gave you, didn't it work for you?
Right.
And I have a comfortable enough relationship with my students that they're pretty honest,
Right.
with me, because I'm honest with them. Like, listen, this is crap. I'm suffering on the struggle bus.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
like,
The struggle
is
bus.
it
I like
something
that.
I did
Yeah,
that, so they're pretty honest. That's what I'm doing with what
Yeah.
they're doing, and so usually it's just my own interest.
Great. So what we're trying to do is shift the mindset a little bit to helping teachers to get some data and just have some focus on the actual experience that students are having, and not just that outcome of turning in the assignment. So it's the process versus the product mentality. How can we add some value to that, especially as students are spending so much time in an environment where we get very little feedback about what they're actually doing in there.
Sure. Okay, so as you know, especially teaching in a cyber school, students have increased access to the availability of technology in schools and in their own private lives. So the landscape of the classroom is really changing. There's really no constraints to time or space in which students engage in learning. So I think that really forces teachers to think differently about their instructional design. But more importantly, we should be asking ourselves as educators, how do we know if we engage students in online content that online content is actually influencing learning? When you're in a classroom, I can read your body language as a student. I can understand or take meaning from the type of questions you're asking or from the type of questions you're not asking. But sometimes when we venture into the online portion of our instructional design, we lose that ability to really understand how students are engaging with the content. So something we were really interested in is, okay, how do we get that back? What type of information can we gain to understand the process? Not necessarily just look at the end product of what they submit to us, but how they engage from beginning to end in that process of learning online. So if you think about, just sort of talk about this question, this is a really important question for us. You know, what's the difference between lesson planning and instructional design? Can you think of any differences between those two, or are they one and the same for you?
Well, instructional design is tough. If you look at the lesson plan, and that is what you want, the major scope of the whole entire unit, and then the instructional design is how you deliver that material.
Part of it is the delivery of the material, absolutely.
So it sounds like did you actually have a class on instructional design?
Yes.
Great. Wow.
Well, and my master's is in instructional design.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you have a very well educated audience,
That's it.
apparently.
Yeah, great.
I hope I don't let you down.
Yeah.
No, I think that instructional design, like lesson planning to me is just like the day-to-day,
Yes.
this is what you're going to get done. Whereas instructional design is thinking about the big picture. The big picture, but broken down into small pieces,
Mhm.
like how you're going to address
All the small
all
pieces.
of the different,
Mhm.
all of the different, how are you going to differentiate this? How are you going to deal with your multimodal learner? Like all of those different types of
Sure.
things.
Yeah.
You know.
And what we've sort of found is, as in working with teachers have been trained to do lesson planning for the most part,
Correct.
and that's what teachers do. If we were looking at creating an online curriculum, like they're selling downstairs at the expo center, they're working with instructional designers. But as teachers are designing content to be delivered online, it seems like we're trying to blend these two worlds together a little bit of lesson planning and instructional designing. And we're trying to help teachers become a little bit more of an instructional designer than just a lesson planner as well.
Right, so you both were right on target. When we talk about instructional design theory, it's more than just that activity or that agenda for the day or the activity that the student's going to engage in. But you're thinking much bigger picture, and you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to plan what resources, I'm going to plan an experience, I'm going to set some objectives either for a unit or even a day, but I have some set goals that I have for the students. And I'm going to really think deeply about the resources that are available to make this experience as meaningful as possible so students can reach that goal, right? This is nothing new. And then we actually implement. But how do we know after we implement that students have actually obtained the goals that we were achieving? And that's where the instructional evaluation comes in, and that's the real important piece. And I think that's where our targeted online learner analytics fits in. So it's that evaluation piece. It's the data we collect from the implementation of the resources in trying to achieve this goal. We collect this data, and from that data, we do some analysis, and we start all over again, right? To make sure that the learning is truly meaningful.
So we're going to talk about this targeted online learner analytics, and I'm just going to kind of skip over this for the moment to talk about what this data is that we're actually talking about. So what I found in working with my school, and that example where I started with, is just the amount of online activity that a student has in a day. This is an actual student day. This is their logs that I can pull from GoGuardian and what that looks like. That's meaningless data for a teacher. An English teacher doesn't need to know what they did in their social studies class to be informed instructionally. They don't need to know how much time they spent on Facebook outside of their class. They need to have the specific targeted data about the learning activity for their student in their class or outside of their class in order to be useful. So it's a focus record of an individual student's online behavior. So how can we get that? How can we tell a teacher exactly how much time a student spent in their class or outside of class, it was a homework assignment, what websites they went to, what Google search terms they used, and then comparatively speaking, how that worked out to the rest of the class. And again, this is literally a sample student log with 227 page views in a day. This student logged on at 7:04 in the morning. The last page view of the day was 10:04 p.m. They did 33 Google searches, and of this, there was 4.5 active hours throughout that day.
Can I ask?
Yeah,
is
go
this
ahead.
based on a device?
This is a device, yeah.
Okay.
So this was literally
Great
a my
question.
yeah.
Mhm.
This is on their Chromebook
Okay.
at my school at North Huntington High School. The first student that I pulled up to pull a record for their day, this is what it was, and that's pretty typical.
But when we look at that as educators, what do you do with that data? Is there anything in there that you can mine as meaningful for your instructional design
From that, the only
process?
thing I would be able to pull is tell the kid to go to bed a little earlier. I'm not getting enough sleep, but
Well.
yeah, it doesn't really inform my instruction.
Not yet.
Yeah. So how can we turn that record into something that actually shows a pathway of their student activity, the website breakdown, a breakdown of time, and so we're going to talk about how we can do that. There's a couple different ways that we can do that, and we'll show you how. So.
Sure. So both of our studies really focused on trying to identify the relationship between the targeted online learning analytics, learner analytics, so that information that you saw, that big list of data, and could there be a link? If we mined into that data, would there be information that would be of value to the teacher, to an educator in their instructional design process? More than a lesson plan, right? Bigger than that. So we had, that was basically the basis of the research.
And really, I mean, everyone, you hear the word data, you hear the word personal data, student data. It's like all these red flags, bells and whistles, because data gets exploited. So really, in a nutshell, we're trying to think, how can we exploit this data for good? Like, what can we do with this in a good way? Exploitation of data doesn't necessarily have to be bad. So let's think about how we can do this, in the right way. And we've already talked a little bit about the context of our studies. We both work at suburban high schools. Isabel actually did her study in a middle school, but both schools that have one-to-one initiatives. And what's interesting, I think, about this is we're in year 3. So it's really this, it's like one-to-one, now what? Like, we're not teaching teachers how to use, Google Docs anymore. Like, we're comfortable, teachers are comfortable having this here. Now that we're here, like, what can we do with these Chromebooks now to actually transform what we're doing and ensuring that we're, using them to their fullest capacity?
And I think one important thing about year 3 is that the literature, the research out there says that by year 3, teachers are ready to talk about instructional design and instructional practice as opposed to focusing on the use of the device. So as you might imagine, when you implement a one-to-one initiative in a school district, for some time, teachers are still trying to grasp the idea of what do I do with this device and how do I operate this device and how do I support students in the operation of this device. But the literature actually says by year 3, teachers are ready to have that really powerful conversation around instructional practice, and that plays a key part in the results of our study.
And then the other, just real quick, the action research format. Both of us realize as principals going in and working with teachers, I would not be able to go into your media center or your social studies classroom and tell you how to use this data. It really has to be the teacher having a clear understanding of that experience that they want their students to have, what that learning outcome is, and what that data would look like for that student. So just a real quick example of that. I worked with an English teacher. She did a study, or her assignment for that night was, she called it the paraphrasing laundry. So she taught the students how to paraphrase, and then she gave them a laundry. It was basically, her analogy was money laundering. It takes a paragraph and launders it down and makes it clean into a paraphrase. But it was I think 7 or 8 steps that the students needed to follow in order to paraphrase correctly according to her. So their assignment that night was they had to access a reading list of some different passages, and they had to choose one and paraphrase it and submit it back in a Google Doc, and they were supposed to use her paraphrasing laundry to help them. So when she looked at the data the next day, or when I looked at the data, I thought it looked great. She thought it would take the kids about 20 minutes. That was about the average. They accessed the Google Doc. They submitted it in classroom. Looked great. When she looked at the data, what she saw is that a lot of the students never accessed her paraphrasing laundry. So even though the kids, they accessed the passage, They submitted an assignment, but they didn't do it the way she wanted them to do it, which is they were kind of winging it, which wasn't the experience that she wanted to have. I totally missed that, and it like blew my mind, because like, how did I miss that? But for her, that was like, oh my gosh, they didn't do this. So she actually redid the assignment. She told the students how important it was to access her laundry. But
the data had value.
that was the data value that only she would have saw. And again, it was based on this idea of the students didn't have the experience that she wanted them to have. They had the outcome. They all submitted the assignment, but it wasn't the right experience.
So did they do it again?
They did it again. Yeah.
Did they access the paragraph?
Yeah, well, because that was part of the thing. Is she wanted that was part of the assignment.
So
Just like a math.
I'm like, did you go back in the next night and be like, okay, now
Yeah.
she come
But
right
just
out
like-
and say, hey, you didn't get on here?
But it's the same analogy of a student turning in a math problem without showing their work.
Right.
You know, so that's
So to that point, in my study, we had a math teacher at the middle school who was really adding some value to student learning by the amount of time that they were spending online with their homework. So, for example, the teacher was looking at a student data, and the student took about a minute per problem to complete the problem. So, and it was a practice problem prior to a quiz the next day. So in the teacher's mind, the student was going to perform poorly because they hadn't invested the amount of time she thought they needed to invest in order to be successful on the assessment. Lo and behold, when the student actually took the assessment, the student was very successful. So, you know, that idea of time on task, what does that really mean for each student? And so that was really mind-boggling and very informative for the teacher. I think we kind of talked about this already, but basically both of our research questions focused on whether or not this information, if we were able to organize the targeted online learner analytic information in a way that is meaningful to teachers, would they use it to change their practice, and would they use it to help students in their learning experience?
Yeah, so we really both know we wanted to really hold the teacher's hand, support them through this process, do the legwork of getting them the data, giving them the time to sit down and analyze it, and really seeing, can we get value out of this? Is this something that is valuable if we put in the time to do it? There's a couple different ways we get the data, as I sort of mentioned earlier. Number one, how I did it from my study, as I mentioned, we have Go Guardian in my school, is we can pull up a daily report, and you can, if you just want to see for your class, you can narrow it down to the class times. If you know that what I actually did for my assignment, because it was going outside of school as well, you have to filter it down by content area. It's labor intensive. It's not easy. As a principal, I love this as a way to do teacher evaluations. Teachers in my school just kind of know it's coming now. It's kind of funny, but we have some great post-op conversations, because what I'll do if I go in and observe a class and I see the kids on their Chromebooks, I'll often leave early because there's nothing much for me to see there at that point. If I know that they're going to spend the last 20 minutes, I'll go back to my office, I'll wait till class is over, and then I'll spend the next 20 minutes pulling up reports and printing them out. And so we'll talk about what the kids actually did online. It's been really great for my professional practice to do that. But it's not always practical. It's clearly not. The other way, so that we do this is when I came out of the dissertation research, we realized this wasn't scalable, it wasn't always practical. We got NSF funding through the National Science Foundation to create a product called the Thinking app. It allows students to record and submit back to their teacher a record of their online activity. So it's a Chrome extension, lives on the top of the Chrome web browser. And what a teacher does is they give their students an assignment code, much like we are using today, that they would turn on and off recording of their activity. So if in class, okay, we're going to start this activity. I want you to turn in your behaviors just like you would turn in your math, show your work on your math problem. When you're done, submit your assignment, and then also submit your data. And you can also do that at home too. So it allows the students to take ownership of their data, and they can see exactly how much time they spent, and they can see the experience that they had. But we're finding that this also, the teachers need to be able to explain to the students the experience that they want them to have. So it's kind of twofold, but that's a free tool. Again, it's NSF funded, and it's called the Learning Thinking app. So what you see with if you do use the Thinking app, you get a breakdown of all your students in your class. You get who spent the most time, who spent the least time, you'll see, which everyone loves that. It's the easiest to show, and everyone wants to see time. You'll see a breakdown of the websites where students spend most of their time. You'll see that individually per student as well. The Google search terms, which is interesting again, the questions that a student asks in Google is really the same thing as them raising their hands in class. If we talk in class today about who General Lee was, in the Battle of Gettysburg, and then the first thing they do when they go home is search who's General Lee. It's did they really pick up what you taught in class? And then again, just to break down how much time they're spending on each website.
Interesting from my study in having my teachers analyze this data for their student activity is the teachers were really intrigued on the path that students took in answering the research question, especially in one of the social studies projects. Like, how did they go from the question, the goal they were trying to answer, what websites they went to, and in what sequence, and how much time did they spend on each of the websites. That provided a lot of insight for the teachers on the quality of their question design, and also the quality of the assignment, which made them really reflect. So being able to take that laundry list of data and organize it into a fashion that is manageable and interpretable by the teachers with some guided facilitation in my study is where teachers found it to be really powerful for that self-reflection of improving the instructional design, or that experience they were trying to
and what we find so many times is, and what's kind of becoming my pet peeve, is this use of the word research. We're doing a research project.
Yes.
So much of what we're seeing is not research.
Mm-hmm.
It's inquiry. Inquiry is when you ask a question and get an answer. That's what so much of what's being masked as online research is really just an online inquiry. If you can answer that question with a Google search or two, what was the value of that?
So one of my science teachers was very surprised to find that the students, he thought that he had an amazing research project on biomes. And what actually ended up happening is that students were just lifting the questions that he had for them, pasting them in Google, and then outputting the information, right? Google outputs that information, and students were just gathering it and regurgitating it back. So his intent, or the experience he was trying to have students live, was to actually conduct that research, ask themselves additional questions, to dive deeper into the content, but that wasn't happening. And it sounds so simple, but as educators on a day-to-day, when you're rushing and you have 120 students a day, sometimes you don't have time to reflect on the quality of your design. And for him, it was so impactful that this year, this was just last year, this year he totally redesigned the project in a manner in which students could no longer just lift the question from his guided research, and they had to do a lot more thinking. And he was honestly surprised, so I don't think he would have gotten there had he not had the opportunity to analyze the online work that students were
And it's not like the students were doing anything wrong.
No, they
completing
weren't.
the assignment that was asked of them.
They were completing the assignment and providing the product, but the process he was discontent with.
So I think we were talking about this. I don't think anyone's looked at online behaviors. And from we've had a couple of librarians that have shown some real interest in this. Do you teach research projects, true research projects?
I do an independent inquiry project where the students, it's under the umbrella topic health and wellness, and I have fourth graders where they don't
Fourth
do
grade.
a lot of their
Yeah.
they don't do a lot of their own resource finding on that. Now I do other projects in collaboration with the classroom too. Like that inquiry project is kind of mine, and at that point in fourth grade I'm not so much worried about, I'm not teaching them at that time how to determine if their sources are
Sure.
readable, reliable,
Yeah.
relevant, that type of thing. But as they get older, I work that in,
Yeah.
and I end up doing a lot of projects in collaboration with the
Yeah.
classroom teacher, and a lot of times those are very low level. You can do, I can see it from the outside looking
Right.
in, and I have, but it's hard to convince a teacher that, hey, you really need to,
Yeah.
you need to step this up, and
But
I can
you
teach
you
my little
also-
bits and pieces along the line, but.
Even that, you brought up such a great point. Is you mentioned how you give the kids the resources, which is great. I mean, because it's understanding what the experience that you want students to have. You don't always want students to waste time searching and finding information. That might not be the intent of that activity. You might want to just give them the information, let them, just like you would be provided in a textbook, you're basically turning your Chromebook into an online textbook, and they're sifting through that information. And what was, again, interesting about one of the other teachers we worked with, he had listed a whole list of resources, it was about the Revolutionary War, that he wanted students to use. The students didn't use them. So this was at a high school level. They did not use them. They used their own.
I get that all the time.
They were just, it was easier for them to Google and
Yeah.
find their own information instead of using the resources that he provided. But again, it wasn't the experience that he wanted them to have. He didn't want them to Google. He
Right.
wanted them to use his resources.
If they
But
have a device in front of them
Yeah.
and the teacher is not standing next to them or not looking at their screen for that 5 minutes, I mean, I can't tell you. Like, when I'm in a class of 30 kids, I'm looking at this one and they're where they're supposed to be, and this one is Googling something on Wikipedia. And I'm, okay, you're not Googling anything. Like, you're not on Google at all. There's a link right here. Click on it. Like, here's where it is.
And that's where, actually, just a really quick note, you made me think about this. That's where having students have access to their own data and managing their own data when they're online can be really insightful for them too,
Yeah.
and understanding how they're managing their own learning, which we kind of talk about that too, that metacognition, you know, what am I really doing as part of this activity? So, this is me. Okay, so we have a challenge for you. Alright, so this is an actual assignment that we used with some adults.
The names have been changed.
The names have been changed, and it's an idea or a concept of how you would engage students in online research, where they really have to delve deep. They can't just lift the question and do a Google search, a simple Google search. So the challenge was, could this realtor sign from New Jersey wash up on the southern coast of France in 2018 after Hurricane Sandy? So that was the challenge we provided students, and Greg, you're gonna help me out on this one.
Sure.
And we had, so we have the results, the story, the online story of 2 students as they attempted to answer that question. So we have Jeff, and we have some background information on Jeff. He's 16, he's diagnosed with ADHD, often fails to complete his work. So that means he often fails to provide you with the product, right? So based on the information we collected from Learnix, the thinking app, time on task was about 27 minutes conducting his research, and he fell within the 85th percentile. So he spent more time on task than most of his academic peers doing research in the attempt to answer that question. And the sites he went to were NOAA, the weather, the government, the weather website. And so his ratio of online research, the process versus the product he actually provided the teacher was a 6-to-1. So
what was the 6 in that ratio?
So the 6
For every
was
6 minutes he spent researching, he spent 1 minute
correct.
writing.
Got it.
1 minute writing, correct. So it goes back to that 27 minutes. And his Google search terms were ocean current, maps, what is a jet stream, sandy storm location. So this student earned a C based on the product that he provided the teacher. Okay? But he spent a 6-to-1 ratio process versus...
Yeah, so then the other student, she had a similar experience. She found a website that explained, the Hurricane Sandy, because this is actually, it is somewhat Googleable, but not really.
Right.
But the experience that the teacher wanted the students to have was to learn about the jet streams, learn about ocean currents, apply that knowledge, and whether they got their answer right or wrong about whether it could or could not have, it was to be able to explain that answer.
Right.
And so both students, I would actually argue that I think Jeff had a more detailed experience. But he didn't spend as much time completing that product. But without the use of that data, all the teacher sees is that end product. They don't necessarily know that Jeff actually spent more time, went to better sites, but whether it's for his ability to articulate or lack of time devoted to it, it wasn't clearly demonstrated. So that is just an example of how the data could be used. And then just to take this a step farther, with 2 other students.
But can I just, if
Yeah,
you could
no,
go back
go
really
ahead.
quick, like a really important point here is, I think, and you said it, if the teacher's purpose was for them to be able to research and pull apart or get back to some of those scientific concepts, like Greg said, Jeff did a really good job. He spent a lot of time researching, but his product only earned him a C in our traditional grading system versus Liz
Yeah.
with the A. So the purpose, our
And
intent.
I think it's really interesting that her first search term was Hurricane Sandy sign.
Correct.
Like she went to like the
Yeah.
fast.
The Google,
She's
yes.
trying to answer the
Whereas
question.
he's
Yeah.
trying to learn the concept.
Correct. And yet, so for me as a science teacher, that by trade, that's what I am. Jeff's research and his search terms were much more powerful and aligned to the purpose of the activity than Liz. But if all I look at is the product and not the experience they had, I don't have the full story
Yeah.
on the student and how they engaged in this learning. So, and you want to add the 2 more. We're going to
Sure.
make it more difficult for you. Now remember, Jeff and Liz, okay? We're going to add 2 more students.
So, Beth, your average student, very social, very distracted, and very little information submitted. So, this is one of those where it's like, there wasn't even enough here. I don't know. This, to me, is, I need to talk to Beth. Okay, how did you get the information? What did you do? Did you steal this from a friend? Did you, were you on your cell phone?
I think that Google Doc was
Yeah.
somebody else's project.
Yes.
Exactly. So she's got a lot of friends again, but you wouldn't know that just by looking at the assignment. So the lack of information is information in and of itself. And then Mark, he was pretty much a typical kid, and this just, I guess for lack of a better word, he was a typical kid.
I was
you
like,
know?
it looks
Yeah.
like his grade
He doesn't have
matches his
much of
effort.
an experience. He's not really learning about anything in science.
That is true.
Correct.
He went on to all the Wikipedia.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Mark would probably tell to get on some science sites. But those were just some examples of some insights that you can gain when you look at the data, not just the end product. There's so much of a richer conversation that you can have with these students about that. And then I think too, I mean, how can you just even separate that? How can we say, how can we more clearly define and curate the experience that we want the students to have? Spend 20 minutes, don't even type anything. I want everyone to spend 20 minutes researching the facts that you need to know for this. Research the jet stream, research ocean currents, and research Hurricane Sandy. Then the last 10 minutes of class, let's break this down. So.
Do you almost think it would be good to, like, again, thinking about how you would modify, to start with the concepts? Say, you know, instead of saying, here's the problem.
Yeah.
You know, like I know that was probably a hook.
Yep.
Right.
You know, to pull them in, but I almost go, okay, I want you to find out what you can find about this, and this. Now here's the hook. Now I'm going to throw the sign at you.
Yeah.
And be like, okay, now based on what you have, you know, take that and you can go research more if you need to, but
I love that idea because what you just did is, so we all as educators design these experiences for students and we have this in mind of what they're going to do, right? And then what they actually do with it, you're kind of, if you don't have insight into the process that they took, you can't think critically about how would I do this differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would only be looking at that product, which is misleading.
So if the teacher was going to redesign this, it would be more like a math problem. You have to show your work. Okay, well, you're doing your research. So what was your first, what did you want to do first to get information? Like,
Yeah.
What was your thought process? What did you want to search? And why did you do that?
And I think it's interesting how much we let Google guide us. And
Yes.
instead of having the students do a little like you were sort of getting at, like what do I need to know before I even type anything in, before I search anything, what do I need to know about in order to complete this? I need to know about jet streams. I need to know about ocean currents, so I know I need to do that. But I think sometimes students just go down the path without knowing where it leads, and knowing where they will want to go.
So some of
Yeah,
our
just real
key
quick.
findings, do this really quickly, some of our key findings from our research is that teachers really select their assignment for students to engage online based on what their outcome is. So if their outcome is that they want to see if students have mastered a concept, they're going to look for what is referred to in the literature as checkpoint analytics. And basically checkpoint analytics is mastery, like, okay, a quiz, a test, something summative where they're, you know, using a Google form or an online quiz just to check for whether or not students have mastered the concepts. But if teachers are looking for or trying to better understand the process that students went through, they're assigning research projects, they're assigning, essays, written documents, blogging, discussions, because they're trying to really get at that metacognitive process that students are engaged in. The problem is we don't have data, or there's no easy way of collecting that information on that metacognitive process along the way, except for what we tried to do with the thinking app.
Yeah, and then just the other one is teachers were very quick to place some blame on the students when, I guess, kind of we as researchers felt like that wasn't always the place. Sometimes it was poor instructional design.
Yeah.
When you have the conversation, the students did exactly what I would have done if I had to do that assignment. So and then I think they did come around and some did realize that. But then just in a nutshell, what the basic takeaway was is every teacher that took the time to analyze the data took something of value away. They were all changed a little bit differently, whether it was the social studies teacher, in his use of resources, or the English teacher with the paraphrasing laundry. Every teacher gained some insight. It was time. It took them time. Even if you use the thinking app, it is going to be something extra. And for those times when you want to, kind of have that capstone assignment or that key assignment, or really take a step back and do a lesson study, it will give you some meaningful data that will improve your practice. And that's pretty much, that's pretty much what we said there. Okay. And so I think you had this one, Isabel.
Yeah, some implications for practice is what we found is that learning analytics, or that targeted online learner analytics, can really be a game changer for teachers and for teaching and learning. If teachers have access to that information, overwhelmingly the teachers that we work with said, this is of value to me in my instructional design process. The biggest piece for them was that customization of the data. So it wasn't that big laundry list that they were trying to mine through, but rather having the data organized and presented in a manner that is easily interpreted by the teacher. But because it's such a new area in education, that facilitation and having someone there to help facilitate and guide the conversation around what the data means was really important for the teachers. So you saw some of my teachers here earlier before we started the session. And that's really the big takeaway for my study is these groups of teachers, middle school team, so a social studies, math, science, and English teacher coming together who share students and having a facilitated dialogue about how students engage in the process of learning online, help them really rethink their instructional design, and they found it to be of really high value.
Yeah, and that's exactly, just to kind of reiterate that point, that's what I found. It was great discussions for me as a principal working with teachers, and that's why I feel we've had some librarians interested in and have used this.
Yes.
Because they, not to say anything bad about librarians, but sometimes they have more time. Like when a teacher takes their class to the library, it's for this big research assignment, and so we're going to focus on this. And so it's the day-to-day activity within a classroom. It's something that most teachers will not take the time to look at the data, and that's rightfully so in a lot of cases.
And I would add on to that really quick with our librarian is they're more interested in the process than the product, because you really are teaching the process of research, and how do you really access information and that is meaningful and true, right? The fact versus fiction. And I think their interest, a librarian's interest in process, really made this tool very valuable for them.
All those 3 bullet points there, are those things like these are all things that you as the leader did for the teachers to bring them in and understand the value of
Correct.
this. So you were the person customizing and presenting the data you were the person facilitating the discussion, you both were.
Well, now with the thinking app, the teachers can get that data on their own.
Okay,
Or even through Go Guardian, if they wanted to take the time to do that, they could do that on there. The thinking app gives it to them a little bit in a more functional way with that, with the graphs and such.
Yes.
But they do have to then actually have the students to submit that. So it's a change in their actual practice in the class. We've also, what we'd like to try to do is put this out with, in New Jersey we call it the Reflective Practice Protocols for Highly Effective Teachers. So they basically do, it's like a portfolio of their work, it's a lesson study. This is perfect for that. We have some teachers that we anticipate using that next year. We're, again, very new with this. And then in Pennsylvania, I forget what that's.
It's the Danielson
Danielson
framework.
framework.
So this aligns to, domain 4
Yeah.
and domain 1. Domain 1 in particular, knowledge of resources and knowing your students and analyzing the data and student engagement. But the second bullet where it said presentation of data, that's where the thinking app was really powerful in my study, because I didn't have to mine through the data to provide it to teachers so they could have this conversation. We went into a classroom, the students downloaded this Chrome extension, the thinking app. They started the thinking app when they started their research. The data was collected. The students were able to then look at their research and say, like, maybe I don't want the teacher to have access or knowledge of the fact that I went to this website while I was supposed to conduct research, which is okay, right? Like, that's empowering the students to own their own data. And then they submitted it to the teacher, and then it came up in this nice little graph, the bar graph and the circles. And then the bar graph and the circles, just to simplify it, is the facilitated conversation that I had with my teachers. Okay, what does this mean? And because, I think like anything else, when you're analyzing data, at first, if it's very new to you, you need to have some sort of guidance to dive deep. But after a while, the teachers could really guide themselves once they had the data in hand.
So yeah, just to wrap it up, I'd love to hear we won't do the 3, 2, 1, but just if you could tell me, what did you learn today? What did you take away from this? Just so I know, so I can improve. And what do you see as a way that we could use this type of analytics to in practice moving forward? Any thoughts on that?
It's like all fascinating to me, but then I'm a data geek. Like,
Yeah.
I never even considered that would be a way to, like, looking at that browsing would be a way to number one, just to get the teachers and the kids focused on what the task at hand was. You just never, you just don't think that way. Yeah, it was all fascinating. It's all good.
Thank you.
I'm sitting here going, should I get that?
Do you see an interesting
way?
way that we could use this that we haven't thought about that you would apply to your practice?
I have, just with looking at data and how, for the online environment, the kids do things synchronously and asynchronous.
Mhm.
So a lot of times we're not allowed to have time for this, and then trying to look at when are they doing work, how much are they spending on a certain assignment at the time. So, well, if you're spending an hour, like, what are you doing in that hour?
Yeah.
So that they're using it efficiently.
We
and
hear
being working
Smart
smarter,
choices.
not
Sure.
harder.
Yeah.
And it definitely that can even go over to teachers too. Like, well, you're looking at stuff and you're saying you don't have time for instructional, purposes or to reflect. Well, what are you doing in the course of the day? Not to be mean.
Well, and
Especially
that's my burning
instead.
question was, I know you had a blip up there about SIPA, but that was my burning question is the privacy issue, and I realize it's district devices, you're always watching,
Yeah.
that's all open information, but it feels like I don't know, just to me, it feels like a little bit Big Brother-ish,
And that's where students have the ability, having the ability to delete information from their log before they submit it.
So if they delete that information from their log before they submit it, will it come up as a time
It
gap?
shows,
it
shows
shines
deleted
as
time.
deleted.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay.
since the students are using our resources, our computers, our everything,
Right.
they have coming into your school, you have to sign a contract.
Yes.
We have the ability to see what they're doing. Yes.
Is there ever a time where you're going through this and you find out this kid, in the course of this, for whatever reason, didn't delete this one site he was, he or she was on,
and then we can put them on access.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Do you do that?
We do.
that?
So
Okay.
that's no different. I think Greg did a great job in the beginning to kind of alert us to that. So as administrators, we're collecting this data on a day-to-day basis anyway, and anytime students do an inappropriate search, it gets flagged and we have to address it. So
regardless of whether you're using that or not, it's still gonna come up.
It's still gonna come up, and that's to your point, a very good point. It's our devices, we have actually a legal obligation to be monitoring the student work. So we are monitoring it on a daily basis. So while I was here at the conferences, our district uses Securely instead of GoGuardian. I had 2 security alerts. Had to call the principal and say, hey, the student was searching this. Can you call him down into the guidance office? So regardless, as an organization, we're using this data. Our question was, can we take it from this protective, I'm not going to call it negative, because it's a way of protecting students, right, to make sure that they're making smart choices and are safe online. Can we take it away from that, not only using the data for that purposes, but use the data instructionally? Because just as we're getting information on what they shouldn't be doing and it's being flagged, we're also getting information on how they are using the devices appropriately for learning. So how can that information be used by us as educators to make their experiences more powerful?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So great question, and we get that all the time because it does sound very big,
It
right?
does. And I mean, I
does.
know that it's already there. I know that it exists. I know that it's existed for years.
Yeah.
That's my.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Google's a multi-billion-dollar company that makes their money off of data.
Yes.
But, and it's got this negative connotation, but how can we help teachers to make not money, but make the best out of data for their students? And that's really this arching question that we're trying to answer. So that's us in a nutshell. We like I said, we both did our research out of East Stroudsburg University. We have some dissertations going on there now that we're on chairing as committee members, people furthering along our work. We're really just kind of on the ground floor trying to figure out what we can do with this. And again, thanks to some NSF funding, we were able to provide an application that we have out available for anyone to use. It's free. If you go to learnx.com, you can try to get some of that data yourself, or you can pull it right off of GoGuardian or whatever online filtering you use. If you do have any thoughts about how you would use the Thinking app or data in general in your class, I would love to hear them. As you probably saw, we're very passionate about this. And I just think there's so much there. There's so much valuable data there. How can we use this?
We could definitely use it for ownership for the students.
Yeah.
Because career to work is something definitely that we try to focus on in Pennsylvania. Our kids have a portfolio. If they want to have ownership, if you want to be a valuable employee and you're, going off and doing other stuff and you're not in class, what would this data tell you to your boss? How would you be able to improve it? Or if, you're questioned about it, can you provide logic behind what you're doing? And if you don't have any logic behind it, why are you doing it? So you can, use it as ownership for that.
Yeah, it's that student agency piece. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
We can't thank you enough.
This is really, I like it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's probably the most exciting. I know it's a small audience, but I'm this is the thing that's my button. That's good.
Yeah.
Good. Very
Well,
good.
we're very grateful that you took your time.
Yeah. Great. And again, if you
Especially
have
on
any
the
questions,
Tuesday last
if you
session,
do
right?
use some
You guys
data,
are
We got one more.
dedicated.
We got one more.
Oh, is there one more?
One more.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Long
it was
day.
the last session.
but if you design a lesson that uses data, you got to let me know because I want to be able to incorporate you into our
I'm
stories.
already sitting there going, how can I use that? But
Yeah.
I don't know what we have, and I'm
Sure.
sure I know we collect that, but I don't know what we use.
Well, you can
but-
go on learnx.com and you can have your students collect their own data if they want, even if you don't have a Securely or a GoGuardian or anything like that. We have the free
Even
app
just to
for
see
it.
what they think of it.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, really?
We would love to
Very
hear
cool.
from you.
Very
So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there I'm trying, this is I have a Google site,
Uh-huh.
and I'm trying to get your presentation. This is
Oh,
actually
if you
my
go
notes.
back to the first slide.
Is it?
Do you have a QR code
I
reader?
have I don't think I have one on this Chromebook.
So you would have to do it on your phone.
Okay.
Which you just did.
But I
You took
have
a
it. I have it
picture.
open. I have it open on my phone.
Okay, so one thing you can do is you can
Can I-
email it to yourself.
I can't share it. I feel like I'm not doing something wrong.
There it is.
Oh, there it is.
Yep. It's already in
Oh,
your
it's already
Google
in my
Drive. Yep, sorry, I didn't mean to touch
No,
your phone,
no,
but I was
it's
like,
all
there
good.
it is.
Because I was looking for.
I know,
Come
I'm
on,
so
there's
bad.
privacy here.
Privacy, I'm touching your phone.
And for all the other sessions, I was like, this was so easy, and I must have been like trying to listen to you and do that at the same time. And
Yeah.
I can't think and listen at
And
the same
feel
time.
free to email us if you run
Okay.
into any, questions or concerns or need anything else.
What school did you say you were with?
I'm in Pine Ridgeland School District. It's just north of Pittsburgh here. So it's. I'm gonna move forward. I'll do something with that. I don't know what I'm gonna do yet. I don't know what it's gonna be.
We're grateful.
But I can't wait to talk to my tech. I'm friends with the guy that's the tech director and be like, hey, what do we have? What can I use? What can I?
So you here still until tomorrow?
I am because
That's great.
we didn't have to travel
So you're so
because it was
close.
our
Yeah.
school district let us come all 3 days, which is the first time we've ever come. So taking
It's
advantage.
the first time that PNC's been out here on the west side of PA. that
Yeah,
I'm
I
aware of.
think. I don't even not since I've been, heard of it.
Since I've been coming to PNC, it's been in Hershey the whole
Yep.
time.
So we convinced our district. We're like, look, we have to
Take
come
advantage
here.
of it.
Yeah, we have to come here because number one, we want to support it. Bring it
Yes.
back to Pittsburgh sometime. But it's all good. Thank you again. That was really wonderful.
Yeah.
I love it when I learn something new.
Yeah.